assistance from us.
Well, we'd like to be able to work with them. We've got to remember Pakistan's been a close friend and ally of the United States in the past. The relationship's been somewhat strained in recent years, primarily because congressionally imposed sanctions have had an adverse effect, clearly, on the relationship. And those sanctions were imposed as the Pakistanis developed nuclear weapons. But we're clearly in a situation here where that relationship is important. It's important to us. It's important to Pakistan. Pakistan borders Afghanistan. They are one of only 3 countries that have diplomatic relations with the Taliban in Afghanistan. They can be very helpful in this case, and we expect they will be.
And there's nothing wrong with providing economic rewards for helpful behavior.
No, I think we're going to want both the carrot and the stick approach.
Pakistan also has a nuclear capability. How dangerous is it for that government to come out against Osama bin Laden or be helpful to the United States? Are we concerned about destabilizing Pakistan with nuclear capability, a capability that could fall in the hands of the Taliban or Osama bin Laden?
Well, we're clearly very sensitive to those kinds of problems. Anytime you're dealing in that part of the world, in the Middle East, the potential for instability always exists. You could have a change in government in relatively short notice, and we're well aware of all that. But it's one of the reasons, frankly, you'll see the al-Qaeda organization, Osama bin Laden, choosing to locate in that part of the world, because it is an area of instability, because there are places that nobody really controls. And those are the areas we're going to have to operate in if we're going to be successful. And again, the key here to keep in mind is that what we're asking nations to do, and which the Pacs have clearly made a decision to do, is we're asking nations to step up and be counted. They're going to have to decide. Are they going to stand with the United States and believe in freedom and democracy and civilization, or are they going to stand with the terrorists and the barbarians, if you will? And it's a fairly clear-cut choice, and I'm delighted to see that Pakistan has, in fact, stepped up to the task.
Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, 3 critical countries in the Middle East who have been somewhat supportive of the United States. They also have segments of their population that look at Osama bin Laden as a hero. If we demand that they support us, do we risk destabilizing those governments?
No, I think you've got to recognize, from the standpoint of the Saudis, for example, they're a prime target for this organization of terrorists, Osama bin Laden. He's adamantly opposes the Saudi royal family. Probably second only to the United States would be his hatred for the current government in Saudi Arabia. With respect to Egypt, for example, and the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, these are groups and organizations that have threatened the government of Egypt in the past. President Mubarak's been the target of several assassination attempts during the course of his career, some of them promulgated by these kinds of groups and organizations. So I think governments, friends of the United States, the governments you mentioned, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, etc., they understand very clearly that it's as much in their interest as it is in ours that we end these kinds of activities, and that we put a stop to this kind of international terrorism, and I think they'll be prepared to help us.
Mr. Vice President, how difficult and delicate is it to send this message that we're going to uproot terrorism and Osama bin Laden and some other cells, but that this is not a war against Islam and not a war against all Arab people?
We have to continually remind folks of that. The President's been very clear, and it would be a huge mistake for we as Americans to assume that this represents some kind of, or should lead us to some kind of condemnation of Islam. That's clearly not the case. This is a perversion, if you will, of some of these religious beliefs by an extremist group. We have extremists associated with, every imaginable religion in the world. But this is by no means a war against Islam. We've got a great many Arab Americans, for example, who are first-class, loyal American citizens. We need to make certain that we don't make the mistake of assuming that everybody who comes from a certain ethnic group or a certain religious background is somehow to be blamed for this. Clearly, that's not the case. They are as appalled by it as we are.
When Osama bin Laden took responsibility for blowing up the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, U.S. embassies, several hundred died, the United States launched 60 Tomahawk missiles into his training sites in Afghanistan. It only emboldened him. It only inspired him and seemed even to increase his recruitment. Is it safe to say that that kind of response is not something we're considering in that kind of minute magnitude?
I want to be careful here, Tim, because I clearly would be inappropriate for me to talk about operational matters, specific options or the kinds of activities we might undertake going forward. We do indeed, though, have, obviously, the world's finest military. They've got a broad range of capabilities, and they may well be given missions in connection with this overall task and strategy. We also have to work, though, sort of the dark side, if you will. We've got to spend time in the shadows and in the intelligence world. A lot of what needs to be done here will have to be done quietly, without any discussion, using sources and methods that are available to our intelligence agencies, if we're going to be successful. That's the world these folks operate in. And so it's going to be vital for us to use any means at our disposal, basically, to achieve our objective.
There have been restrictions placed on the United States intelligence gathering, a reluctance to use unsavory characters, those who violated human rights, to assist in intelligence gathering. Will we lift some of those restrictions?
Well, I think so. I think one of the byproducts, if you will, of this tragic set of circumstances is that we'll see a very thorough sort of reassessment of how we operate and the kinds of people we deal with. If you're going to deal only with sort of officially approved, certified good guys, you're not going to find out what the bad guys are doing. You need to be able to penetrate these organizations. You need to have on the payroll some very unsavory characters if, in fact, you're going to be able to learn all that needs to be learned in order to forestall these kinds of activities. It is a mean, nasty, dangerous, dirty business out there, and we have to operate in that arena. I'm convinced we can do it. We can do it successfully, but we need to make certain that we have not tied the hands, if you will, of our intelligence communities in terms of accomplishing their mission.
These terrorists play by a whole set of different rules. It's going to force us, in your words, to get mean, dirty, and nasty in order to take them on.
Right.
And they should realize there'll be more than simply a pinprick bombing.
I think it's the thing that I sense, and of course now it's only been a few days, but I have never seen such a determination on the part of, well, my colleagues in government and the part of the American people and the part of our friends and allies overseas, and even on the part of some who are not ordinarily deemed friends of the United States, determined in this particular instance to shift and not be tolerant any longer of these kinds of actions or activities.
Even if we take out Osama bin Laden, that will not stop terrorism.
No, no, he's the target of the moment, but I don't want to convey the impression that somehow, you know, if we had his head on a platter today, that would solve the problem. It won't. You've got this organization, as I say, called Al-Qaeda. So somebody described it the other day as it's like an internet chat room. The people who come and participate in it, for one reason or another, engage in terrorism, have sometimes different motives and ideologies, but the tactics they use, the way they operate, their targets, that'll continue until we go out basically and make the world unsafe for terrorists. And that's a key part of the strategy in terms of working aggressively with those nations that have previously provided support and sustenance and sanctuary to see to it that they no longer do that.
You wouldn't mind having his head on a platter?
I would take it today.
Saddam Hussein, your old friend, his government had this to say: the American cowboy is rearing the fruits of crime against humanity. If we determine that Saddam Hussein is also harboring terrorists, and there's a track record there, would we have any reluctance of going after Saddam Hussein?
No.
Do we have evidence that he's harboring terrorists?
There is, in the past, there have been some activities related to terrorism by Saddam Hussein, but at this stage, you know, the focus is over here on Al-Qaeda and the most recent events in New York. Saddam Hussein's bottled up at this point, but clearly we continue to have fairly tough policy where the Iraqis are concerned too.
Do we have any evidence linking Saddam Hussein or Iraqis to this operation?
No.
Let me turn to the events of Tuesday. Where were you when you first learned a plane had struck the World Trade Center?
Well, I was in my office Tuesday morning. Monday I'd been in Kentucky and the President had been in the White House. Tuesday our roles were sort of reversed. He was in Florida and I was in the White House Tuesday morning. And a little before 9, my speechwriter came in. We were going to go over some speeches coming up. And my secretary called in just as we were starting to meet, just before 9 o'clock, and said an airplane had hit the World Trade Center. That was the first one that went in. So we turned on the television and watched for a few minutes, and then actually saw the second plane hit the World Trade Center. And as soon as that second plane showed up, that's what triggered the thought terrorism.
You sensed it immediately. This is deliberate.
Yeah. Then I convened in my office. Condi Rice came down. Her office is right near mine there in the West Wing.
The National Security Advisor.
National Security Advisor. My Chief of Staff, Scooter Libby, Mary Madeline, who works for me, convened in my office, and we started talking about getting the counterterrorism task force up and operating. I talked with the President. I'd given word to Andy Card's staff, who's right next door, to get hold of Andy and/or the President, and then I wanted to talk to him as soon as they could hook it up. This call came in, and the President knew at this point about that. We discussed a statement that he might make, and the first statement he made describing this as an act of apparent terrorism flowed out of those conversations. While I was there over the next several minutes watching developments on television, and as we started to get organized to figure out what to do, my Secret Service agents came in, and they, under these circumstances, they just move. They don't say, sir, or ask politely. They came in and said, sir, we have to leave immediately, and grabbed me and
literally grabbed you and moved you.
Yeah, and your feet touch the floor periodically, but they're bigger than I am, and they hoisted me up and moved me very rapidly down the hallway, down some stairs, through some doors, and down some more stairs into an underground facility under the White House. And it's in effect a corridor, locked at both ends, and they did that because they'd received a report that an airplane was headed for the White House.
This is Flight 77, which had left Dulles.
Flight 77. It left Dulles, flown west towards Ohio, been captured by the terrorists. They turned off the transponder, which led to a later report that a plane had gone down in Ohio. But it really hadn't, of course. Then they turned back and headed back towards Washington. As best we can tell, they came initially at the White House. And
the plane actually circled the White House?
Didn't circle it, but was headed on a track into it. The Secret Service has an arrangement with the FAA. They'd had open lines after the World Trade Center was
tracking it by radar.
And when it entered the danger zone and looked like it was headed for the White House was when they grabbed me and evacuated me to the basement. The plane obviously didn't hit the White House, turned away and we think flew a circle and came back in and then hit the Pentagon. And that's what the radar track looks like. The result of that, once I got down into the shelter, the first thing I did, there's a secure phone there, first thing I did was pick up the telephone and call the President again, who was still down in Florida at that point, and strongly urged him to delay his return.
You told him to stay away from Washington.
I said, delay your return. We don't know what's going on here, but it looks like we've been targeted. And
why did you make that judgment?
Well, it goes to my basic role as Vice President is to worry about presidential succession. And my job, above all other things, is to be prepared to take over if something happens to the President. But over the years, from my time with President Ford, as Secretary of Defense, the Intel Committee, and so forth, I've been involved in a number of programs that were aimed at ensuring presidential succession. We did a lot of planning during the Cold War, Tim, with respect to the possibility of a nuclear incident. And one of the key requirements always is to protect the presidency. It's not about George Bush or Dick Cheney. It's about the occupant of the office. And one of the things that we did later on that day were tied directly to guaranteeing presidential succession, and that our enemies, whoever they might be, could not decapitate the federal government and leave us leaderless in a moment of crisis. It's why, for example, when we have a State of the Union speech, and we've got the entire government assembled, president, vice president, congressional leaders, cabinet, and so forth, we always leave a cabinet member out. It's always taken to a secure location and set up there in case something should happen in the House chamber, so we still have a president.
Did you have any role in Speaker Hastert, Speaker of the House, being taken away?
We evacuated Speaker Hastert to a secure facility and later the rest of the congressional leadership. I also ordered the evacuation of cabinet members, and so we sent Tommy Thompson and Veneman, Gail Norton, also up to a secure facility. And in the days since, we've always maintained to say I've spent a good deal of my time up at Camp David since the president returned to the White House, just so that we weren't both together in the same place, so we could ensure the survival of the government. Now, the president was